Despite everyone warning us not to go, my family and I decided to visit Yosemite National Park during one of the busiest weekends of the entire year, and we still managed to have an incredible time. Now, that was by no accident. For weeks leading up to the trip, I was planning, reading Reddit threads, watching countless YouTube videos, trying to find all the best tips and tricks on how to visit Yosemite. Now, after experiencing Yosemite myself, I'm excited to share everything that I know to help make your trip as seamless and enjoyable as possible, whether you go on a busy weekend or not. Let's face it, no one wants to spend their Yosemite vacation stuck waiting in long lines at the entrance and then having to circle around to find parking. That sounds like a nightmare. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 9 actionable tips you can take to make the most of your Yosemite trip. And if you stick around to the end, I will reveal how many days I think you actually need to visit Yosemite. So sit back and relax. This is your travel guide to Yosemite National Park. Tip number 1, wait until Glacier Point Road and or Tioga Pass open. So this is an oversimplification, but you can think of Yosemite as 3 roads. The first is the valley floor, which has this circular loop. The second is Glacier Point Road, and the third is Tioga Pass. Now, why should you care about these other 2 roads? It's because if they're closed, then everyone that's going to Yosemite is going to be limited to the valley floor, which means there's going to be way more congestion, way more traffic. The other reason why you'd want to wait until at least one of these roads open is because if they're open, then it opens up more points of interest, more attractions that you can see. For example, my family, we went in late May, and while Tioga Pass was closed, Glacier Point Road was open, so we got to see Glacier Point, which is one of the most iconic viewpoints in Yosemite. It overlooks the valley floor, and you can see a great view of Half Dome. So the next question you might have is, okay, when do these roads open? You can't predict exactly when they open, but I'll link a web page of the historical opening dates for both of these roads. This will help you better gauge when you can expect them to open. So my best advice for you is to plan your trip around one of these roads being open and make a backup plan in case the roads aren't open. So for my family, we were really hoping that Tioga Pass was going to be open, but in the event that it wasn't open, we were going to do Hetch Hetchy. Lo and behold, Tioga Pass was not open, so we ended up doing Hetch Hetchy instead. So you kind of have to be flexible and open-minded about what you can or cannot do if you kind of go around this busy time, which is spring, summer. Tip number 2, arrive early morning or mid-afternoon. This is probably the most obvious tip, but why should you care about going early? I've read many stories online of people arriving to the front entrance of Yosemite and then having to wait an hour or hours just to enter. Clearly, that's not what you want to happen, especially if you're limited on time. So to save all of that time, you want to get to the park as early as possible. A common thing I read online is that Yosemite is like the Disneyland of all the national parks because of how busy it gets. The next question is then, how early? How early do you go? Taken directly from the official Yosemite website, the National Park Service, they recommend as a guideline to arrive by 8 in the morning. To be more specific, I think they mean arrive 8 in the morning to the front entrance. For my family, we arrived around 7:30 and then got to our destination of choice at 8 in the morning. We erred on the side of caution because we were going during a busy holiday weekend during the busy season. So just to play it safe, we wanted to get there really early. Before the trip, I was reading on Reddit, some people were saying, oh, you have to arrive as early as 6 in the morning. Oh, you could just show up at 9 in the morning. You can never predict how busy the day is going to be. So, you want to play it safe. I'll just say that. So you could arrive very early in the morning, or you can arrive mid-late afternoon. I think mid-late afternoon should be fine because the people who have come early in the morning, by that time, a lot of those people will start to trickle out of the park, and then it'll be easy to find parking. When we went to Hetch Hetchy, which is lesser known part of Yosemite, but still pretty heavily trafficked, we went in the mid-afternoon and we found parking easily. So there's that. Tip number 3, park your car and leave it. Now this is pretty common advice you'll find online: park your car and leave it. And the reason is because parking can be very tough in Yosemite. What you don't want to happen is that you park at one point of interest, you're finished with that activity, and then you drive to the next destination only to find that there's no parking. That would be not good. Now, where should you park? From my understanding, there's 3 main parking lots. I have it written down. There's Curry Village, Yosemite Village, and Yosemite Valley Lodge. For my family, we parked at Yosemite Valley Lodge. Now, why should you park at these 3 areas? Well, that leads me to tip number 4, which is bike or shuttle around Yosemite Valley. So once you park your car, you're not just limited to that area. You can either bike or shuttle around Yosemite. My family, we opted to do the biking because it seemed more adventurous. You have the freedom and flexibility to stop and go wherever you want. Well, let me rephrase that. You can't go necessarily wherever you want. You're kind of limited to what the trails are, but you know, it's a pretty good loop around the park. Yeah, and after doing it myself, it was an awesome experience. So I would definitely recommend doing the biking route. Now, here are some reasons why you would want to use a shuttle. 1, it's free. 2, it goes directly to many points of interest. 3, it covers more ground than the pathway for the biking. And 4, if you don't like to bike, then you don't have to bike. I think the main reason why we didn't do the shuttle service is because I heard that during certain times of the year, the lines can be pretty long. And again, we were going during the busy season. In trying to avoid as many situations where we had to like wait in line, we were like wasting time, just kind of idling around. I was just trying to avoid all of that. We wanted to make the most of our time at Yosemite. So picking between a bike and a shuttle to get around Yosemite is really going to come down to your travel style. Tip number 5, check the National Park Service website for important alerts. So I keep on referencing the National Park Service website, but it truly is the place where you want to be getting all your information because it's coming directly from the National Park Service themselves. At the homepage, or I think on any webpage, so at the top of the webpage, there is a alert section with all the important information. It has stuff on road closures, hike closures, reservations, all the things that you need to know before going to Yosemite. Yeah, it was important for us because one day we were actually going to use the shuttle service to get to a hike. We were going to park in one place and then use the shuttle to go to the hike. But then because we read on the website that certain shuttle stop was closed due to renovations or something, that kind of derailed our plans and then we had to park somewhere else. So you can't predict when things close, when things are under construction. So you definitely want to refer to the website to update you on that information, and maybe your plans are going to have to change. You don't want to show up to Yosemite and then kind of be through a curveball and have to figure out on the spot. Tip number 6, get real-time traffic updates from Yosemite National Park. I think this tip is really helpful. So if you text YNP traffic to 333-111, then you'll get real-time updates on when things are getting full, like when parking areas are getting full or things are being closed. I'll just talk about like what we experienced to give you the most insight. So on one of the days, we were going to go to Hetch Hetchy, and we planned to go around noon. But the text service, I got a text. It's on my phone, which I'm recording on, so I don't know the exact verbiage, but I think it was around like 9:45 a.m. They said the parking to Hetch Hetchy is full. And then 15-20 minutes later, it said 2.5 hour wait to get to Hetch Hetchy because the lines were back 2.5 hours. And we were like, oh, we're not gonna leave at noon. We're gonna leave much later, like mid-afternoon. And that's exactly what we did. And when we did that, when we arrived, we were, a little nervous if there was going to be a line, but there was no line. So this illustrates 2 points: that it's okay to go in the mid-afternoon, and 2, to subscribe to this text service, because had we not used that, then we would have showed up and potentially waited hours in line. What I would suggest is I would subscribe to this text service like a week before your trip and see what kind of updates roll in when things are getting closed, if any at all. And then you could have a better idea of if it's safe to go to that place at this certain time or not. We didn't do that, but in hindsight, that's what I would have done. Tip number 7, take one car. So I guess this applies to only bigger families, but in our situation, we had 10 of us going, and originally we were gonna take 2 cars, but after I got some advice from other people, we decided to get a 15-seater passenger van so that everyone was in one car. And because the cell signal in Yosemite isn't great, I'm so glad we took one car where everyone was in, one car. Because it would have been hard to communicate. Also, everyone being in one car just makes the trip more fun. I think if we had taken 2 cars, we would have gotten lost. It would have been hard to communicate where the other person was, and I think it would have been a nightmare. So taking one car if possible is the way to go. Tip number 8, bring walkie-talkies. This kind of ties in with the last tip that cell signal is pretty tough in Yosemite, so bring walkie-talkies, especially if you're in a larger group, is important so that you have people communicating with each other. This was particularly important during the hikes where one group would naturally be ahead and then another group would be behind, but you wanted to make sure that like they weren't too far behind or anything like that. You just want to communicate, so bringing walkie-talkies was helpful. Tip number 9, it matters where you stay in the park. So this is something I didn't realize until afterwards and we sort of lucked out. There are several entrances to Yosemite. I don't know exactly how many. I think it might be 3 or 4 if you're going to the valley floor. But there is one particular entrance, I believe it's the south entrance, that gets a lot of traffic to enter the park. And my advice is if you're not going to stay directly in the park because 1, it's too expensive, or 2, you don't like camping, then you're going to be like my family where you stay outside the park. And I would recommend not to stay at a place where you enter Yosemite from the south entrance, because taken directly from their website, it could be a 1 to 2 hour wait just to enter the park from the south entrance. For my family, we stayed in Groveland, and so we entered from the north entrance, and when we got to the entrance, there was no wait. No wait at all. We just breezed on through, and we were on our merry way to whatever destination we wanted to go in the valley floor. So yeah, just something to think about, something to consider. If you do want to stay somewhere that you have to enter the south entrance, then I would just leave your accommodation even earlier than you would have anticipated. So that was my 9 tips on how to organize and best optimize the time for your trip. But the other question is, okay, what do you actually do when you're there? I put a lot of thought into this. If you were to ask me how many days it takes to really experience Yosemite, what is the ideal trip? My answer would be 4 days. Now, my family, we did 3 days, but I think if we had an extra day, it would have been even better. So let me break down what those 4 days would look like very briefly. 1 day, it would be exploring the valley floor, like through bike, going to Glacier Point. 2nd would be a day trip to Hetch Hetchy. 3rd would be a day trip going along Tioga Pass. And 4th would be an epic hike. So for us, we did the Mist Trail. The only day that we really didn't do was Tioga Pass because it wasn't open. But the actual 3 days that my family did, we had a lot of fun. It was an incredible time. It was even paced. In my opinion, it wasn't like we did too much or did too little. Of course, you can kind of condense these 4 days into like 2 days if you really wanted to, but I think you'd be hating yourself because you would be just so tired by the end of the day. So I think 4 days is a good amount to see a good variety of things without burning yourself out. If you want a more in-depth look in my 3-day itinerary, then you can check out my Yosemite video here. As always, happy travel planning and see you in the next adventure.